Welcome to a brand new series on the channel called History of, where I will discuss at length anything that piques my interest. So in one video we'll be talking about some European monarch, and the next I'll be gushing about some random doggo. Speaking of doggies, Siberian Huskies, my favorite dog breed. Beautiful, intelligent, stubborn, will literally never leave you alone. I should know, I own one. The dogs that would one day become the breed we know today as the Siberian Husky originated in Siberia, the Chukchi Peninsula to be exact. The Chukchi people of the region have been using dogs as a means of transportation for a very long time. Archaeological evidence points to the use of dogs in this manner as far back as 2,500 years ago in the Chukchi area. These early dogs were very similar to the Siberian Husky we know today, with their friendly nature and ability to withstand very cold temperatures. The dogs were brought up very close to their humans, likely explaining their friendly personality. They were allowed to sleep inside with the humans as a way of keeping children warm. One of their myths says that two of the dogs guard the gateway to heaven, and that they can reject anyone who had been cruel to their dogs in life. So it's fair to say that the Chukchi people love their dogs immensely. These dogs still exist today in the form of the Chuktoka sled dog. Although they haven't had an easy time, as in 1930, the Soviet Union halted the export of dogs to the United States, causing the final split in the breeds of the Siberian Husky and Chuktoka sled dog. Then, the breed's population suffered further due to advancements in transportation and the outlawing of whaling. By 1988, less than 2,000 dogs remained, and most were mixed with other dog breeds. It would take the collapse of the Soviet Union and a new legal provision that allowed the Chukchi people to once again hunt whales for the breed to recover. Current populations are about 4,000, though we can't be sure how many of those are purebred anymore. Now as to how these Chukchi dogs ended up in Alaska. A Russian fur trader named William Gusak imported the first team of Siberians into Alaska in 1908. No one was impressed by these tiny dogs weighing between 40 and 52 pounds. People called them Siberian rats. Gusak wasn't fazed by the public's lukewarm reaction to his dogs. He entered his team in the 1909 All-Alaska Sweepstakes. Held 10 times between 1908 and 1917, with World War I and other sled races contributing to its end, 2 celebratory races having taken place on the 75th and 100th anniversary in 1983 and 2008 respectively. It was a round trip from Nome to Kendall and back again, ending in Nome. Remember Nome, it'll be important in the story going forward. The betting odds were 100 to 1 on Gusak's dogs going into the 1909 All-Alaska Sweepstakes. Despite this, they placed third. A fellow competitor in the race, Fox Mayule Ramsey, traveled to Alaska and brought back 60 of the best dogs he could get a hold of. The next year, he and his uncles drove the dogs, divided into 3 teams, in the 1910 All-Alaska Sweepstakes. 2 of the teams took first and second place, and the last finished a respectable 4th. Now, the Siberian rats were gaining popularity as racing dogs. I think it's time to introduce one of the most important people in our tale, Norwegian-born Leonard Seppala. Seppala's friend, Japhet Lindbergh, had convinced him to come to Nome, Alaska in 1900 to work in gold mining. Seppala would become a naturalized citizen in 1906. Lindbergh would also be the one to introduce Seppala to Siberians. Lindbergh had acquired the dogs for explorer Roald Amundsen for a planned expedition to the North Pole. The dogs were put in Seppala's care, and he was excited to train them. I literally fell in love with them from the start, he recalled. I could hardly wait for sledding snow to start their training. After the expedition was canceled, shortly after the dogs arrived, Lindbergh gifted the pups to Seppala, and this may have been one of the greatest things to happen to the breed, and Seppala would become known as one of the greatest mushers of the 20th century. On impulse, Seppala would enter the 1914 All-Alaska Sweepstakes, with his lead dog being a Siberian Malamute cross named Sujin at the last minute. Neither of them knew the trail. This first race almost ended in disaster, as they very nearly went off a cliff and his dog's paws had been torn up. Seppala would feel horrible about this, as he felt he had abused his dog's loyalty by putting them in such danger, and he dropped out of the race. Seppala would give the sweepstakes another go, this time much better prepared, and in the lead he had Togo. Togo was born to a Siberian import named Dolly, sired by Seppala's lead dog Sujin. He was the only puppy in the litter. Togo was a sickly puppy and had to be cared for by Seppala's wife Constance. Even after getting better, Seppala thought the small puppy would be ill-suited to the life of a sled dog, so he was given away when he was 6 months old. Togo, however, had other ideas, crashing through a window to return to Seppala, who was impressed by the pup's loyalty. Togo was often allowed to run loose alongside the team while in harness, which became a problem. If he wasn't nipping at the harnessed dogs, he was leading them after reindeer. He would also harass the lead dogs of other teams, something that would almost cost him his life when he decided to go after a team of Malamutes who mauled him. This may have been where he got his injured ear. After this incident, Togo learned to keep away from other teams, something that would serve him well. Togo would get his shot at leadership one day when he was 8 months old. Togo had once again broken out of the kennel and it took off after the team. Seppala, in a bid to keep him out of trouble, harnessed him to the wheel position. Seppala, impressed by the dog's drive, kept moving him up the line until he was running double lead with a dog named Rusky. In Togo, Seppala had found a natural leader. In the 1915 All-Alaska Sweepstakes, Seppala's biggest competition was Scotty Allen, another European immigrant, this time from Scotland. Much like Seppala, Scotty had traveled north in search of gold. This, however, didn't work out, so he got a job at a hardware store and started training dogs. He, along with his lead dog Baldy, had won the All-Alaska Sweepstakes 3 times, and placed in the top 5. Indeed, by the time they were on the final leg of the race, Seppala's only competition was Scotty. Seppala and Togo would overtake Scotty and Baldy to win the race, and would win the next 2 years in a row. Togo and Seppala's names were cemented in the racing world. But it would take a near tragedy for the rest of the country to see how amazing these Alaskan sled dogs truly were. In December of 1924, Dr. Curtis Welch, the sole doctor in the small remote village of Nome, Alaska, started to diagnose many children with what he believed to be tonsillitis. Then, in the coming weeks, children started to die. On January 20th, 1925, Dr. Welch made the first definitive diagnosis of the epidemic they were facing. Billy Barnett, a 3-year-old boy, had diphtheria, a deadly infection. Nowadays, most developed countries, such as the United States and the UK, have vaccines which have pretty much eradicated diphtheria. In 1925, the only cure was an antitoxin made from horse's blood. Nome had a small supply of 8,000 units, but it was expired. Dr. Welch had ordered more, but the antitoxin wasn't with the supplies that were brought in to Nome on the last ship of the season. Now, in the dead of winter, Nome was cut off from help. There were no roads leading into Nome, nor were there any train tracks. The tracks ended at the town of Nenana, 674 miles away from Nome. No ship could get through the ice on Nome's coast. The only means of transportation was by dog sled. Nome was in trouble. So were the nearby native villages, who fared much worse as they had no natural resistance to diseases. In 1918, half of the native population was killed by an influenza outbreak. On January 21st, Billy Barnett dies of diphtheria and another case is diagnosed, that of 7-year-old Bessie Stanley. Welch opts to try using the expired serum, injecting her with 6,000 units, to no avail as she would pass later that same day. That evening, Welch and Nome's mayor, George Menard, call an emergency town meeting. Welch will need at least 1 million units to stave off an epidemic. In the meantime, they put a quarantine in place to hopefully slow the spread. Welch sends out a plea through telegram for antitoxin. An epidemic of diphtheria is almost inevitable here. Stop. I am in urgent need of 1 million units of diphtheria antitoxin. Stop. Mail is only form of transportation. Stop. I have made application to Commissioner of Health of the territories for antitoxin already. Stop. There are about 3,000 white natives in the district. On January 26th, 300,000 forgotten units of antitoxin were located in a hospital in Anchorage. It'd be just enough to stave off the situation long enough for a larger shipment to come in from the west coast of the lower 48. There was a campaign to fly the serum into Nome, but after repeated issues, the next best thing was greenlit. To have 2 teams of the best sled dogs carry the antitoxin from the end of the rail line in Nenana to Nome, meeting halfway in Nulato. Normally this trip would take over a month, time the citizens of Nome didn't have, and Welch was concerned that the serum wouldn't withstand the freezing cold temperatures for long. Seppala was chosen for the dangerous trip from Nome to Nulato and back, having once made the trip in 4 days. Seppala would set out for Nulato on January 27th, along with 12-year-old Togo and his half-brother Fritz in lead. Meanwhile, the decision to add more dogs to the race is come to, with no way to inform Seppala of the change. Wild Bill Shannon is the first to receive the serum with his team of 9 dogs in Nenana, led by 5-year-old Blackie. The other dogs on his team inexperienced, however. The trail is bad and the temperature is dropping by the time Shannon arrives in Minto at 3 a.m. He leaves 3 of his dogs at the roadhouse. 2 of them would end up dying. At Tolovana, Shannon, along with his dogs, are in bad shape and passes the serum to Edgar Callens, who is to take it 31 miles to Manly Hot Springs. Callan's hands are frozen to the sled and he needs hot water poured over them. The serum is then passed to Dan Green, then Johnny Folger. Each driver takes time to warm the serum at each roadhouse, lest the cold damage it. Passing through the hands of Sam Joseph, Titus Nicolai, Dave Corning, Harry Pitka, Bill McCarthy, Edgar Noller, George Noller, Charlie Evans, Tommy Patson, Jack Jacksrew Nicolai, Victor Aganek, I hope I said that right, Aganek, Miles, I'm going to butcher this, Goanganen, and Henry Ivanhoff. Seppala, still not aware of the change in the relay, had crossed the dangerous Norton Sound. A risk, as the ice on the sound was always unpredictable and could break apart, and the team could either fall into the icy depths or be stuck on an ice island and drift out to sea. The dangers were worth it for Seppala, as it would save an entire day each way. Just outside of Shaktoolik, Seppala came across Henry Ivanhoff, stopped along the trail, his dogs having gotten tangled up in a fight. Seppala, still thinking he still had a lot of trail ahead of him, drove on. Henry had to flag his fellow musher down by exclaiming that he had the serum. Seppala turned Togo and Fritz to receive it, and then turned back to the dangerous Norton Sound. Togo was the only thing that kept the team on the track, as Seppala couldn't see through the blizzard. Seppala and Togo ran the most distance out of any team, running 170 miles without the serum and 91 miles with it. In Golovin, Seppala passed the serum on to Charlie Olson. If all went according to plan, there would only be 2 more handoffs before the serum reached Nome. Along the way, Charlie stopped to blanket his dogs, 2 of which suffered badly from frozen groins. In bluff, he would pass the serum on to the next 2 biggest players in our story, besides Seppala, Musser Gunnar Kaysen and Balto. Gunnar leased his team from Seppala, so Balto was his dog. Balto had failed to impress Seppala, like Togo had many years before. At 6 months old, he was neutered and deemed only useful for hauling freight. Gunnar, by comparison, really liked Balto and had made a pet of him when they weren't working. There is some differing opinions on the lead dog of Gunnar's serum run team. Some claiming that Balto was not supposed to be the lead on the team at all. Instead, the lead was Fox, claiming that either Gunnar decided to put Fox in the lead because he liked them, or that Fox refused to go in the storm. Neither makes much sense, as if Balto was an inexperienced lead, then it's unlikely he would have been able to effectively lead his team through the whiteout conditions. On the other hand, if Fox was as trail-hardened a leader as people claim, then why would he refuse to go? It's much more likely that, like Fritz and Togo, the 2 were in a double lead. The trail was just as harsh on the team as it had been for others. Snowdrifts were chest-high on the Siberians, and the same whiteout conditions that had plagued Seppala also affected Gunnar. At one point, the sled flipped over, and Gunnar had to dig around in the snow to find the serum. Gunnar and his team arrived in the roadhouse in safety to find it quiet. The final musher, Ed Ron, expecting that the blizzard would delay Gunnar, had went to sleep. Gunnar decided the time to wake Ed would take too long when Nome was so close, a choice that would forever taint his image in the eyes of all who would hear the story. Balto and Fox led their team into Nome at 5:30 in the morning. A total time for the relay was 5.5 days. Meanwhile, while all this was happening on the trail, the events had become major news across the United States. So naturally, when Balto was one of the lead dogs to bring the medicine into Nome, he got all the credit, something that forever annoys owner Leonard Seppala. Togo had done more and deserved more credit. It didn't help that Seppala returned to Nome without Togo, who, along with another dog, broke away to chase reindeer. They would show up in Nome later and be returned to Seppala. Balto and his team would be taken to the lower 48 and would never see their home in Alaska again. In fact, these heroic Siberians were entering a life of hell. While the dogs were in California, a short film titled Balto's Race to Nome was filmed. Afterward, he and his team toured the Vanderbilt circuit. On December 17, 1925, a bronze statue of Balto was sculpted by Frederick Rolfe and unveiled in New York City's Central Park, with Balto himself in attendance. The plaque depicts Balto's sled team and has the following inscription: dedicated to the indomitable spirit of the sled dogs that relayed antitoxins 600 miles over rough ice across treacherous waters through Arctic blizzards from the Nana to the relief of stricken Nome in the winter of 1925. Endurance, fidelity, intelligence. Balto truly was the most famous Siberian Husky in the country, an impressive feat seeing as the breed wasn't even recognized by the American Kennel Club yet. But just as fast as he rose to fame, he fell again. Seppala wanted to wash his hands of the Balto business and sold the dogs. Case and unable to buy Balto, returned to Alaska. The dogs ended up in a dime museum, chained to a wall, hot and covered in mange. All but 6 of the dogs are missing. Whether they had been sold off separately or died in the dime museum, we may never know. But now Balto, Fox, Alaska Slim, Tilly, Billy, Cy, and old Montauk, the dogs who had been hailed as heroes, needed their own hero. Lucky enough for them, that hero would come in the form of a Cleveland businessman in a newspaper campaign. While visiting Los Angeles, George Kimball happened upon the dime museum and was appalled by the conditions the Huskies were being kept in. A price of $1,500 was placed on the dogs' heads, and Kimball returned to Cleveland and, with the help from the newspaper The Plain Dealer, started a campaign to raise money to save the Siberians. On March 19, 1927, a little over 2 years since the dogs arrived in Nome with the serum, the dogs arrived to their salvation in Cleveland, Ohio. They would live out the rest of their lives in the local zoo. Over with Seppala, he embarked on his own tour of the lower 48 and brought with him 40 dogs, including his entire serum run team. On December 30th, Togo was awarded a gold medal by Roald Amundsen in Madison Square Garden. In New England, Seppala competed in many races against the local Chinook dogs, winning easily. He started a kennel with Elizabeth Ricker in Poland Spring, Maine.
Ricker was also a musher.
Today, a small museum inside the Poland Springs Maine State Building commemorates Togo's epic feat, as well as his later years living in Maine. Within 2 years of that renowned Mercy run, Togo was brought to Maine, his owner partnering with Poland Springs' Elizabeth Ricker to open a nearby kennel.
Togo lived the rest of his life right here at Poland Spring. Elizabeth adopted him.
Togo lived just another 4 years.
In thankful acceptance of a piece of raw salmon for my supper.
Since then, books have been written, movies made about his life.
Togo was bred many times and became an important sire in the breed. When Seppala decided to return to Alaska, he left Togo with Ricker. Ricker would write a book entitled Togo's Fireside Reflections, which is out of print today. On December 5th, 1927, Seppala had 16-year-old Togo euthanized. He was taxidermied and his skeleton articulated. At first, his taxidermy mount was on display at the Shelburne Museum in Shelburne, Vermont. Togo's mount has been degraded in quality due to being poorly protected, and visitors would pet him. Eventually, Togo was returned to Alaska and is on display at the Iditarod Trail Sled Dog Race Headquarters Museum in Wasilla, Alaska. The Peabody Museum of Natural History at Yale University has the skeleton. In 1930, the American Kennel Club officially recognized the Siberian Husky breed. 3 years later, the dog that helped popularize the breed to the American public, Balto, was euthanized at age 14. Like Togo, Balto's skin was mounted and is on display at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. Siberian Huskies have remained popular. Some may argue too popular, as many shelters are overrun with the fluffy things. People get them for aesthetic reasons and don't want to deal with their shedding, high energy, or independent natures. The HBO show Game of Thrones started an epidemic of people getting this breed only to dump them later on. Some within the breed are also unhappy with how the AKC standard has changed the body type of the breed. These show lines tend to be shorter, denser boned, and with longer, thicker fur. Not much longer, but look at the picture on screen. The racing line is taller and more often than not lighter in build and coat color. My own dog is more in line with the racing type husky, and I have to admit I prefer it over the show line, but that is my opinion, and honestly, temperament-wise, a show line might be better for the average home. Remember, just because mine is calm doesn't mean they all are, and I almost never show much of my girl's energetic bursts, which she does have. Adopt or shop responsibly. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this new video. This is just me hyperfixating on random shit, and my family are sick of me talking about it, so now you guys get to listen to me talk about it. And this has been, I've loved the history of Siberian Huskies, and I also got to talk a whole shitload about the serum run to Nome, which is one of my biggest fixations that I research about incessantly. So hope you guys enjoyed this. Bye.